Some stories in British film history are whispered rather than told. In the dusty corridors of the British Board of Film Classification, one name still causes old-timers to lower their voices: the Ferryman Incident of 1981. I've spent 15 years investigating film censorship cases, but nothing compares to what happened to David Whitmore. The facts are sparse, the witnesses few, and most of the official documentation has vanished. But the story that remains is a descent into madness that changed British film censorship forever. The early 1980s marked a pivotal moment in British media regulation. The video nasty panic was reaching its peak, with tabloids whipping up hysteria over violent horror films finding their way into family homes through the newly booming VHS market. The BBFC, Britain's film censorship authority since 1912, found itself overwhelmed with submissions ranging from legitimate international releases to underground exploitation films of questionable origin. David Whitmore wasn't the type to crack under pressure. A 20-year veteran examiner at the BBFC, colleagues described him as methodical, unflappable. He'd sat through thousands of films, including notorious works like Cannibal Holocaust and I Spit on Your Grave. His detailed notes were praised for their clinical precision. David could watch anything, former colleague Margaret Chen told me. He approached each screening like a surgeon approaching an operation, which makes what happened on October 12, 1981, all the more disturbing. The submission arrived in a plain canister marked only as The Ferryman. No production company listed, no director credited. The paperwork was minimal, but technically complete. Standard procedure dictated 2 separate viewings by different examiners, but Whitmore requested to handle both screenings himself. Nothing unusual there. He often took point on more challenging submissions. The first warning sign came 90 minutes into the initial screening. The projectionist, James Hadley, heard screaming from the viewing room. He found Whitmore pressing himself against the far wall, eyes shut tight, repeating, wrong frame rate, over and over. When asked if he needed medical attention, Whitmore composed himself and insisted on continuing. The next morning, cleaning staff discovered strange symbols drawn across the walls of Whitmore's office in black marker. Geometric shapes, spirals, and what one cleaner described as eyes that seem to follow you. Whitmore had no explanation when questioned. He claimed no memory of drawing them. The second viewing was scheduled for October 14th. This is where accounts start to diverge. What's clear is that 20 minutes into the screening, Whitmore attacked the projection booth with a fire extinguisher. 3 people were needed to restrain him as he screamed about letting them through and the wrong kind of light. He was immediately placed on medical leave. The BBFC's response was unprecedented. Within 24 hours, all traces of The Ferryman vanished from their records. The film itself disappeared. When pressed by journalists, the board claimed no submission under that title had ever been received. The story might have ended there, filed away as an unfortunate mental health incident, if not for the 1997 leak. An anonymous source released internal documents that painted a disturbing picture of those 2 October screenings. The notes from other examiners who viewed brief sections described a film that shouldn't have been possible to make. On a technical level, it seemed to violate basic principles of cinematography. One examiner noted shots that appeared to be captured from impossible angles. Another described sound that felt like it was coming from inside your head, despite the standard mono setup of the screening room. Most disturbing were the reports of subliminal imagery that seemed to move independently of the film's progression. As one examiner wrote, "The shadows in the background shift even when the frame is paused. This cannot be happening." The content itself was apparently unremarkable, amateurish even. The limited plot descriptions mention a ferryman transporting souls across a river, but shot with the production value of a student film. It looks like it was made by someone who had never seen a movie before, trying to recreate one from description alone, wrote examiner Thomas Reeves. But the technical anomalies remain unexplained. Analysis of the single recovered frame, found in Whitmore's case file, raised more questions than answers. The film stock contained no known photographic compounds. When placed under a microscope, the image structure didn't match any known photography or printing process. The frame itself shows what appears to be a dark figure standing beside a tree. But as photo analyst Mary Sutton noted, the shadow cast by the figure falls in a direction that's physically impossible given the apparent position of the sun. It's as if the figure is being lit by a light source that isn't there. Whitmore never returned to work. He was institutionalized after attempting to burn out his own retinas with a desk lamp. Now in his 80s, he remains in long-term psychiatric care, refusing to watch television or look at photographs. His only statement about the film's content, "It wasn't meant to be seen through human eyes," has fueled decades of speculation. Theories about the ferryman range from the mundane to the fantastic. Some suggest it was an elaborate psychological experiment gone wrong. Others point to the technical impossibilities as evidence of more outlandish explanations. Former BBFC chairman James Palmer offers a simpler theory. Sometimes the human mind, when pressed to evaluate shocking material day after day, simply breaks. Perhaps what Whitmore saw matters less than what it made him see in himself. But this explanation fails to account for the missing records, the anomalous film stock, and the other examiners' reports of technical impossibilities. The BBFC maintains its official position. No film called The Ferryman was ever submitted for classification. I've interviewed dozens of people connected to the case over the years. Most speak only off the record. One former projectionist, who asked to remain anonymous, told me, "I've run tens of thousands of films through those machines. Whatever that thing was they screened in October '81, it didn't behave like film. The way it moved through the gate, it was wrong, like it was fighting against itself." The case remains one of British cinema's darkest mysteries. The BBFC instituted new protocols after the incident. No single examiner can view a submission twice, and mandatory breaks are required between screenings. But they never explained why these specific changes were implemented. During my research, I discovered that 3 other film classification boards worldwide reported similar incidents between 1978 and 1982. Each involved a submission with minimal documentation, technical anomalies, and psychological effects on the viewers. Each record was subsequently erased. Each board instituted new viewing protocols afterward. The recovered frame from Whitmore's file was lost in an archive fire in 2003. The leaked documents vanished from the journalist's home who first reported them. Today, only photocopies of photocopies remain, growing fainter with each reproduction, like memories of a nightmare that won't quite fade. Sometimes, late at night in the BFI archives, I find myself wondering, what if something was meant to be seen during that brief window in the early 1980s? Something that needed human eyes and analog projection to complete some purpose we can't understand. And what if it's still out there, waiting to be threaded through a projector one last time? But then I remember David Whitmore, who hasn't looked at a moving image in over 40 years, and I close the archive files, turn off the lights, and try not to think about what might be hiding in the shadows between frames.